In this video, we're going to talk about how to cope with a relapse if you've been dealing with binge eating disorder. I've had a really good few months where I didn't binge, I've been eating a bit more, nourishing myself better, and I've put on some muscle. And things are in a pretty good place in terms of nutrition and fitness. I was better nourished, I was more energetic, I just generally felt a lot better. And I guess it kind of coincided with it being summer and kind of being a relatively calm and stress-free period in my life. That probably helped. In recent weeks and months, my stress levels have gradually been going up, and that has been having an impact on my sort of day-to-day habits. And that's coming from a lot of things, like, finances, budgeting, just the state of the world, inflation, cost of living, trying to save up for a property, doom scrolling. There's so many things that just kind of can weigh you down, and this has been starting to affect me a lot more recently. And I wasn't kind of giving myself any kind of escape or release from what I was feeling, so it was kind of just building up and building up. And I realized that I was gradually starting to lose interest in looking after myself. I was putting off or skipping workouts, or just when I was doing them, I was kind of low on energy. I wasn't as disciplined with nutrition. I was very much lacking in hydration. Coffee is definitely not a substitute for water. I wasn't taking the supplements that I normally take, which can sometimes help me sort of make up for gaps in my nutrition. So there wasn't one single catastrophic thing that I was doing or one single self-destructive thing. It was just kind of losing the interest or losing the desire to do everything. So I wasn't doing anything as well or as consistently as I should have been. And I was finding I was a little bit more prone to snacking, not binging, but just, snacking a bit more when I was bored or when my mind needed some kind of release. And it's also worth noting that whatever this kind of stress or low mood or whatever I was feeling was, I never sought help. I never really spoke to anyone. I just kind of tried to mask it and just got on with my day. Like I said, there was no release, and I just kind of let it keep building up. And then more recently, I had something happen in my life which hit me a lot more mentally and emotionally, and it hit me very hard. And at the time of recording, probably 2.5, 3 weeks after that happened, I'm still not entirely over it. I feel a lot better, but it does still weigh on me very heavily. This isn't a therapy session for me to go on about my emotions. I just wanted to give some context for, what I've been going through and what I've been dealing with, and kind of, lay out the conditions that led to a relapse for me. I had this kind of underlying low mood and stress, which I didn't address. Then I had this sucker punch emotional hit, which I very much struggled to cope with, and I'm still kind of dealing with. And then very quickly, my binge behavior started to return. So after having had maybe 6, 7 months where I didn't really binge even once, I had 4, I think it was, in about a 2-week period. They weren't as big as sort of the binges I was having when my binge eating disorder was at its worst. The fact that I was still eating a little bit more throughout the day probably helped, but I hadn't had like a single binge kind of episode in a while. So then to have 4 in the space of 2 weeks was pretty devastating. The good news is I've got myself out of that kind of funk that I was in. I'm still kind of processing and dealing with all the emotional and mental side, but I've gotten on top of the binge behavior pattern. I feel a lot more in control, and I'm going to talk about how I did that. First thing I want to do is just address the sort of mental health and emotional side of things and the emotional trigger which I had. And just to make sure I add my normal disclaimer, I'm not a mental health professional, so please do speak to a professional if you need specific advice. But with any mental health issue, whether that's depression, stress, anxiety, anything that you're going through, try and speak to someone or try and get help or try and address it early on. It makes it much easier for you to process and deal with. If professional help is available to you, definitely make use of that. If you're lucky enough that you have a friend or family or someone close to you that you can speak to and they can just listen, then great. Please do reach out to them. I, for a lot of reasons, wasn't in a position to have either of those available to me. If, like me, you don't have someone that you can necessarily speak to and help address whatever's going through your mind, here's what I did. First of all, I tried to let myself just feel what I was feeling. I listened to a couple of meditations that were specifically for the thing I was dealing with, or the area I was dealing with, and just closing my eyes, lying down, listening to those just helped me feel like I was releasing some of the emotions that I built up. And that release was really important to me because, to the best of my knowledge at least, no one knew what I was dealing with or what was in my mind or what I was going through, and I think I was masking it quite well. So I wasn't getting any release otherwise, and it was just building up and building up. So having some kind of outlet like that really helped me. And then at the same time, I did try and find, I guess the best way to put it is, a way forward. I looked at what kind of caused the conditions that set me up to get that emotional hit that I got. And I started to look at how I can put myself in a position where I'm not dealing with those things anymore. And I've been able to set myself a 6 months target and start working on a plan to get there within that time. It's not an immediate fix, but it gives me a sense of purpose, and it gives me some kind of meaning, and it gives me a bit more motivation. And it kind of gives me a little bit of light in what was feeling like a very dark time. Next up, I want to talk about dealing with the binge urges. I mentioned it before in a past episode that the one thing which helped me deal with my binge urges was finding a purpose, or finding something that motivates me more than the urge to binge. So in my case, there were two things I needed to address: the thing that caused emotional hit for me, and the underlying stress I was having. While I was working through my emotions, I realized what I needed to do to get myself out of where I was. I set myself a 6-month target, and that gave me motivation, that gave me purpose, and that's helping me now to stay in control. I think what's important to take away here is that, you want to understand the cause, the underlying cause of what your trigger was, and finding some kind of solution or way out, or having something in the future that you think will help you stop feeling like you are. That made a big difference for me because it felt like a source of light in darkness. That all kind of helps with the overall kind of binge urge and behavior pattern. But what do you do after binge if you have relapsed? So in the immediate aftermath. It's worth noting that, especially if you've had a long period where you haven't binged, you can be prone to very intense feelings of guilt and shame and a little bit of despair if you've ended up binging again, or if you have relapsed. So here are kind of the 5 things which I would say. They're quite vague, quite broad, and quite generic, but they did definitely help me as well. Number 1 is forgive yourself. You are human, you are going to be prone to emotions. That doesn't mean, forgive yourself and not try and address whatever the underlying cause was. It means understanding that we're all prone to emotions, and sometimes the intensity of those emotions needs something to immediately sedate it, and sometimes it might be a binge. And number 2, which I've kind of already started to address, is start to look at the underlying cause. What's triggering your binges? What's triggering your emotional state? And then that will help you find a way forward in the long term. Number 3, do something to change your mindset. And that's not just me saying if you're depressed, cheer up or something like that. Genuinely trying to change your mental state, so focusing your energy on something else. Doing something productive or creative that gives you a sense of fulfillment and joy, that's a good start. Just try and get yourself out of the current kind of claustrophobic environment that you're in. Cinema, listen to a podcast, go for a walk, just something to kind of get you out of that headspace. Number 4, move and get active. I'm going to choose my words very carefully. I'm not saying to try and go burn off what you ate or burn off what you binged on. That behavior pattern can start to overlap with bulimia, which is another eating disorder. But from personal experience, some kind of movement or exercise, even gentle, has always helped me feel better after a binge. It can be as hard or as easy as you want, and I've done another video before on the best exercises I think to do after a binge, which I have linked in the description. But generally, I go for gentle exercise, so a walk, yoga, moderate hikes, and nothing extreme. Just something to kind of give me a sense of fulfillment, a sense of enjoyment, and to kind of keep me mentally engaged enough that I'm not thinking about what I just ate. And lastly, number 5 is, it sucks to say it, but move on. You can't undo what you just ate, so as difficult as it is, try not to dwell on it too much. You can only look at why it happened or what might have caused it and try and learn from it. You can't reverse time and undo it. So in other words, acknowledge it, learn from it, and move forwards. Dwelling on it might actually make you feel worse. So to recap, binge eating disorder relapses definitely suck. To be fair, that's probably the same for other eating disorders, addictions, and mental health issues. If you can get professional help for any emotional issues you're going through, please do sooner rather than later. If you have someone to speak to, please do reach out to them. If not, you can work through it on your own. I've done it. You can too. Just know that it's not an easy road. Try to understand the underlying cause or trigger of your relapse and look at finding a way forward from that cause or the conditions that led to it. And of course, the 5 things that helped me in the immediate aftermath of a binge. Number 1, forgive yourself. Number 2, find a purpose to address the underlying cause, which, by the way, can make you feel better pretty quickly. Number 3, do something that's going to change your mindset or engage you mentally. Number 4, get active and start moving. And number 5, try to move on so you don't dwell on it. You want to acknowledge it happened, learn from it, and move forwards. Any comments, questions, feedback? Let me know.